Salutations, respected viewers. In this video, I'm going to explain why Boris Johnson will never become Prime Minister. There was even a book published a few years ago, Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, and several other things that will never happen. Well, BoJo is a man of vaulting ambition. If you said Boris to people in the United Kingdom, people would instantly know who you're talking about. So, just in case you're not sure, well, he was born in 1964 in New York, though he has lost the accent, as Paul Merton memorably quipped. He's best known as being a journalist, and he's got impeccably established credentials in as much as he went to Eton. He was a King's Scholar, as you might like to point out, partly because this is indicative of academic prowess. Moreover, it shows that he wasn't that loaded. Okay, his father was from an upper middle class family as well, worked for the UN, did various things, was even a Conservative MEP, but they weren't stinking rich. Better off than most people, no doubt about that. He's from a family of 4 children, or is he even 5? His sister, Rachel Johnson, is a very well-known journalist. His brother, Joe, was a financial journalist and now an MP. Anyway, BoJo went to Oxford University. He read classics. That's Latin and ancient Greek. And he was president of the Oxford Union, which is perhaps the world's most estimable debating society. And then he said he tried to become a management consultant. And he said in his CV, apparently, he lists that management consultancy one day. Now, this may be a typical Johnsonism, playing fast and loose with the truth for comedy value, because he's notorious as a joker. So then he worked for the Times, who was sacked for making up a quotation from his uncle Colin Lucas, who was Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University. So he had lots of connections with the high and mighty. Anyway, then he worked for the Daily Telegraph, which is the main right-wing newspaper in the United Kingdom. And he was their Brussels correspondent in the mid-90s. And this was when Euroscepticism was already growing in the United Kingdom. The EU hadn't been controversial, particularly from the late 80s. But then there was the Treaty of Maastricht. Would that be passed? And then a considerable faction, the Conservative Party, was against that. It was passed. The European Union was created in 1993, having the European Economic Community up until that point. So apparently, those who know BoJo say that in his columns, he was playing to the gallery of the squirearchy, the sort of Colonel Tufton, Bufton types who buy the Daily Telegraph, and saying how the EU was dreadful and it was a scam and it was ripping off the United Kingdom. And some would say he was pandering to xenophobia and Little England sentiment. But anyway, apparently in private, he was an enthusiast for the European project. And I thought, this is the way forward, this is sense in moderation, and it's best for us all. It wouldn't surprise me if it was completely duplicitous. He married Allegra Mostyn Owens right after he graduated from Oxford, but they divorced pretty quick. And then he met someone he'd been at school with, Marina, what's her surname, Wheeler, and a barrister. He impregnated her, and a month before their child was born, they wed. So that was that. But him being two-faced about the European Union, apparently that's typical of his opportunism. He seems to be completely cynical, but he's renowned for his comic reportage and writing editorials and columns. So I know someone who taught him and said that even as an adolescent, he was an exceptionally gifted orator and known for his japes. Then in 1997, he stood for election in Clwyd, a seat in Wales where the Conservatives had no hope, and of course he was thrashed out of sight. It was a vintage year for New Labour, so the Conservatives suffered a very heavy defeat. So it was no surprise that he crashed and burned there. And that's when I very first met him, right after that election. I've met him several times. And he is the same. Well, I can't really say I've met him in private because there was quite a few people there. One of his notorious incidents was his school chum, Darius Guppy, said, "Do you have the address of so-and-so?" He was a journalist in the 90s. It's long before the internet, we could easily look these things up. This journalist was this pesky hack, was publishing a thing about Darius Guppy, who was later sent down for a insurance scam and staging a false mugging in New York. You can read all about it in Roll the Dice, Guppy's confessional autobiography. But BoJo did supply the address on the basis the guy would not be too badly hurt. He worked for The Spectator and then was editor of The Spectator, which is a cerebral, small-c conservative magazine. It was owned by Lord Black of Cross Harbour. Conrad Black owns the Daily Telegraph, this Canadian media mogul who was into right-wing British politics. But the proprietor only made Johnson editor on the basis that Johnson promised Lord Black that he would not seek to stand for Parliament in the next few years, and Johnson reneged on that promise, as he did in so many more. He was soon selected for Henley, which is a safe Conservative seat, formerly represented by Michael Heseltine, Deputy Prime Minister, an arch Europhile. They say that a constituency goes from one sort of MP to another, even within the same party, different personality types. Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, Hesse was a big beast, although Hesse was a man of principle, was absolutely rock solid on the European Union, made up his 1950s, and never seemed to have considered it again. So he was a foam-fecked fanatic on the EU. BoJo was, how to put it, harder to make up his mind, and I think he's certainly not a man of principle. I think one couldn't accuse him of being a conviction upon politician, except he's convinced of his own abilities, do anything for his own advancement. So he double-jobbed as a leader, as editor of The Spectator, as well as MP for Henley. Of course, it's allowed, but he was an art spokesman for the Tory party, and an article came out that he was having an affair with Petronella Wyatt. He'd impregnated his mistress and she had an abortion. But he told Michael Howard, leader of the Conservative Party, that this was complete bunkum, a pyramid of inverted piffle, as Johnson said in a typically colourful phrase. Well, it turned out to be a lie, his denial. So he was sacked from that, and his Spectator published an article saying that the Liverpudlians shouldn't have been lamenting the murder of Ken Bigley, and they were also self-pitying about the the Hillsborough disaster. Apparently it was actually penned by Simon Heffer, but Johnson published it, so he had to go and grovel in Scouserland for a while. He said to have had up to 10 extramarital affairs, one of which was allegedly with Anne McElvoy about 2002, a well-known journalist who's also married. But she interviewed him when he was going for Mayor of London. I'm surprised this didn't come up, actually. So he was elected Mayor of London in 2008, which was a tremendous success for the Conservatives because it was quite a strong Labour city. There was Ken Livingstone, who confounded his critics, seemed to be fairly successful, even by people who were quite hostile to him. So the Conservatives were delighted with that. Also, it was the nadir of Labour's popularity, 2008, so it was a lucky timing for him. And it seemed to presage the Conservative general election victory of 2010. So BoJo had to appeal to a more multi-ethnic place, be more LGBT friendly, where previously he'd been slagging off the very idea of same-sex marriage, saying, if two men can get married, why not three men, or indeed three men and a dog? He was mayor during the 2012 Olympics when the world spotlight was on London, so he was seen to have been a tremendous success. A bit of a Prince Hal, leaving behind his misspent youth and no more gaffes. He's known for coming out with so many Bobo. He's such a talented wordsmith. But one of the reasons he won't be Prime Minister, despite his very checkered career, is everybody knows he thinks of his own advancement, as this track record, which I've laid out for you, proves. And before plumping for Brexit, it said that he considered what would do best for his career. So it's a complete arriviste, though I concur with his opinions. Sometimes I don't really know what his opinions are. I know what he's saying, but he may not well believe it. Does he know his own mind? Perhaps the only thing that matters to Boris Johnson is Boris Johnson. So he's guilty of chicanery on many occasions. His stock is low now. People have got bored of the act, him being buffoonish. A lot of his public persona is studied, and he's sesquipedalian, which rubs some people up the wrong way. He's too posh for many people, maybe not so ludicrously pucker as the Honourable Jacob Rees-Mogg, who seems like a throwback to the Edwardian era almost. So he's believed to be calculating, and I think he is egotistical. If he was a leaver because he actually thought that was better for the United Kingdom, fine. Even if you completely disagree with him, you could respect that. But he doesn't believe it, or indeed disbelieve it. And they say, oh, he wrote 2 articles before he declared his hand on that issue, arguing either side of the issue. But in a way, that's sensible, because he was just weighing up the argument. What's the pro, what's the contra? And on balance, which one makes more sense to you? So that was that. So actually, for writing the 2 articles, I don't condemn him for that, whereas I do deprecate him for many other things, because it was not a clear-cut issue, and it was not a simple one either. So in where he seems to be like the thinking man's Trump, not as toxic, but really completely self-centered, plays fast and loose with the truth. And he's highly articulate. That's different from Trump. I think he's got greater self-restraint. He's more intelligent. I don't just mean it in a merely academic sense, but wiser than Trump. Obviously, Trump is 20 years older and going senile. So to some degree, Boris Johnson is yesterday's man. People have got bored of him. He's been in the public spotlight for 20 years. He was almost a household name before he was elected to Parliament in 2001. He's 54, so I can't say he's too old. Theresa May became Prime Minister at 59. I mean, Gladstone was Prime Minister at the age of 85. And that was when did Gladstone's last ministry end? 1893, is that right? So that was actually much more unusual to even live to 85 back then. But Boris Johnson's enemies are legion. Remainers don't like him. Many of his cabinet colleagues were envious of his media profile, his success. He didn't command a great deal of support amongst the civil servants when he was Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary for a couple of years. Even some of the hardcore leavers felt he shouldn't have been in the cabinet at all, should have resigned much sooner. The timing was cynical. David Davis notably gets respect, even from those who take a completely contrary view of Brexit. So I think the joke has worn off. It's gone stale, and his image has soured. When the Conservative leadership and therefore the Prime Ministership came up for grabs in 2016, he bottled it. He was all going to go for it. This was his hour, because since his toddlerhood, he has aimed at being world king, as his sister Rachel perhaps unwisely vouchsafed. So you're trying to get up that slippery pole, and there's no one slipperier than he is. That should help him, you'd think. But he was knifed by Michael Gove, somebody who was on his team, suddenly came out and with an absolute drone strike of a comment about him saying, I can't possibly support Boris Johnson, couldn't trust him so far as I could punch him, things along those lines. But Boris Johnson, he should have stood anyway, but he lost his nerve. So I think opportunity knocks. I think people who lose once very seldom get it the second time. So that's that. You can't really be ideologically on his side because you don't know what his ideas are. The Honourable Jacob Rees-Mogg seems to have some time for him, but that's because Rees-Mogg really doesn't connect with the common man, whereas BoJo, people used to think he was entertaining, even though they didn't like him, even apolitical people. So, but I think BoJo's time is gone. Gove shot his fox, and really he's alienated too many people, Boris Johnson. So, you know, the Muslim community and obviously the PC Brigade were up in arms about his comments on the veil. So I don't think Boris Johnson's ever going to be Prime Minister, even though there will be a vacancy in the next couple of years.